Win big in 2025 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the live draft assistant, free agent finder, and lineup optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major fantasy platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass using my promo code Knuckler. Just visit rotoballer.com/radio and start rotoballing like a boss. This podcast is also brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They got paid contests coming to a state near you. They're slashing lines, giving out boosts and bonuses all day long. Hop in those DFS player prop contests. That's a real fun platform. And what is up, everybody? This is the first interlude episode of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that for the year 2025. Folks, we got a lot of MMA action coming up this week, starting to ramp up for the year 2025. UFC 311 this week. For my picks on all of that stuff and more, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. And with me today, he has once been a guest on the Tap That podcast, and he's been up to some great stuff since we last talked to him. He is a 6-0 professional light heavyweight, middleweight, and a heavyweight, hailing, born New Haven, Connecticut, but he's fighting out of Springfield, Missouri. He's been repping the state of Missouri hard over the last couple of years. Give it up for Julius Juicebox Walker. Julius, thank you so much for being back here, man. How's it going today?
Dude, it is going great. I appreciate you having me on, brother.
Dude, so the last time I talked to you, you were fresh off of a win over Niall Bartling by second round submission. Before that, you had pretty much told me that a fight was in the works against Darren Stewart, as I believe. Was that who it
It
was?
was what was his friggin' name? Robertson.
Oh,
Kyle
okay.
Robertson.
Okay.
No,
So,
Carl Robertson. That's his
Carl
name.
Robertson. And you know what? I always get Carl Roberson and Darren Stewart mixed up too. So that
Dude, they're like almost the same, right? That
since then, like you knew you were going to get like a former UFC opponent as your next fight in Synergy FC.
was
You
the goal.
getting a matchup with Bevan Lewis. And that
Hmm.
happened in November of 2024. You end up finishing it by first round TKO. Dude, eh, forgetting the last fight, which we'll talk about in a minute, my
Hmm.
God, it has to be incredibly vindicating at this point in your career to get a win over a former UFC fighter. And not only that, a guy that, even though he did mostly losing in the UFC, he's
Hmm.
guys like Trevin Giles, like Darren Stewart, like Uriah Hall has a win
Hmm.
over Daquan Townsend. So it has to be incredibly vindicating at this point in your career at 6-0 to get a win over a former UFC competitor.
Bro, it's huge. It definitely built my confidence a lot. Obviously the goal for all of us guys is to get in the UFC. And with that win over Nile, it was one of those where I was like, man, I think I'm getting close. And then I got that win, and I was like, all right, now I'm really starting to prove to myself that I belong at that level.
And it's kind of it's a weird thing, right? Because we've kind of seen this with dudes like Nick Maximoff, where when you mix three weight classes, there's great things about that. It shows versatility to the UFC. It shows that you're
Mhm.
ready to go whenever, wherever. At the same time, people want to see that you actually have a home, like in a way.
Yeah,
And so, but even so, the win over Bevan Lewis has to at least show to you, like, dude, like everything I've put into it at this point is well worth it. A win over a former UFC guy. That means, dude, as a fan of this sport, that on any given night, any UFC Vegas Apex card, any contender series card, you're a guy that has a chance to get a win.
I believe that fully, man. And I think this year's the year that I show it.
So, like the Bevan Lewis fight, leading up to that, you were expecting a former UFC opponent, but how did that
Mhm.
like formulate at Synergy FC 16?
So we were looking around. Dude, it's always tough on the regional scene to try to get the former UFC guys because those guys have been paid, big sums of money to fight before, and they fought under the bright lights. I mean, Bevan fought Uriah Hall at UFC 232, that Jones Gustafson card. So it's like I think from their perspective, they're going from that kind of thing to fighting, in Springfield, Missouri, and a 3,500 or 4,000 seater mosque, for a fraction of what they've made before. So it's always tough to get those guys booked. But we put some feelers out there. Bevan actually reached out to not Bevan, I believe his manager reached out to the promoter and was like, we'll take that fight pretty much immediately. And it came together really quickly, which was really sweet. Like there was no hiccups with it, no long negotiation, this, that, the other. It was one of those things like as soon as I heard the name, I think the fight poster was out in a couple days. So it was really cool and it got over with really fast.
And so, like, for Synergy FC, and this,
Mm-hmm.
like, because I'm fascinated by the business of regional MMA promotions.
Yeah.
Like, in a good way and a bad way. Like, at the same time, like, I think that there's a lot of people involved that, like, thank you for your help. You should not be involved.
Yeah.
It just like I want to see regional MMA scenes develop, and some people are the wrong people for that, and some
Mm-hmm.
people are the right people. So, what does it go into getting a former? What goes into getting a like from your side that you've seen, like the anticipation, and what is the business side of getting a former UFC fighter to agree to a regional MMA title fight?
I think for the UFC guy, from their perspective, it's got to be the right opportunity. It's got to be the right guy. I think from his perspective, I was like, one of the better prospects before I fought him. Um, and with that being the case, I think he knew that a win over me was probably going to be something that could maybe get him back there. Because a lot of these former UFC guys, they're trying to get back there. They're trying to figure out a way to get back there. And if you've got something like that, that helps. And then I think the other thing is the dude you have fighting them has got to be able to sell a lot of tickets. Because here's the thing, Bevan is I want to say he's from Georgia or something like that. So he's not selling any tickets in Springfield, Missouri. So you've got to have somebody that's in there with them that, me fighting a former UFC guy in Springfield, I think that was able to help me sell a lot of tickets. People were hype about it. And you've got to be able to fund the purses, right? So it's got to be you got to have a guy that can sell some tickets. And in Springfield, Missouri, I can sell a few tickets.
And just to play this real quick.
Let's go.
Folks, that is the crowd that Julius Juicebox Walker can sell a few tickets for. You get the first round TKO. Immediately, the feeling has got to be like everything in my athletic career up to this point, because we talked about your college basketball career and in
Mhm.
combat sports in the first episode. But this time, it's got to be like, damn, like I belong here.
100%. And it's one of those things where it's like it was one of those moments I remember after that fight thinking like, man, because everything led to here. Basketball for me ended a little prematurely. And it was one of those things where I was like, man, everything led to this moment, and there's nowhere else I'd rather be. And it felt like the culmination of something good. But the key that I wanted to take from it was I was like, I don't want this to be like a peak, you know what I mean? This has got to be the beginning. I've got to try to find a way to raise my level, because here's the thing, Bevan was a tough opponent. I fought some tough, good opponents, but the UFC, man, it's a different breed. And I know in the 205 division, there's really not that many fighters. So if I get in there, one of two things happens, right? Let's say you get 3 fights in the UFC, you're either going to win a couple or you're going to get cut. And if you're successful and you win a couple, now you're probably fighting top 15, top 20, top 25 guys in the world. So it's like I know like I gotta get to that level, push even harder, be ready for that when it comes.
And so, folks, this guy's Twitter profile reads 2 times Synergy FC and Peak FC light heavyweight champion, future UFC champion. Now, that next fight that you had
Mm-hmm.
after Bevan Lewis. This is the fight against Myron Dennis. He is a professional kickboxer with a long-standing pedigree. He fought guys that really you'd be kind of looking like at where you compare with.
Mm-hmm.
He's fought Dylan Potter, who he beat. He's lost to Fabio Charant, Ty Flores, Hugo Tokos. And
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of professional kickboxing wins. A professional kickboxing fight with Chris Camozzi, who is, still in the top 100 of light heavyweights, according to Tapology, which of course take with a grain of salt, but still. So like this fight with Myron Dennis at Peak FC. In this era where so many pro kickboxers are making their way to mixed martial arts, and we just saw
Mhm.
Almeida with possibly a knockout of the year candidate.
Good Lord.
Jesus Christ, man. It was a Czech Congo Pat Barry situation. Sort of,
Ugh.
but still, like I thought Abdul Razak Hassan was dead on that shot.
I was quite worried.
That was like, that just goes to show like any Apex card, like no matter how many ranked fighters are on it, it's still UFC competition. And if people are showing up ready to fight, there can be some awesome results. So
Right. And if I remember right before that was the Kopylov and Curtis fight, like
yeah.
right before it. So it was like, dear Lord.
And dude, so Action Man Curtis actually used to train at a gym that I used to train at in high school.
Oh, wow.
It's Son of Siam in mixed martial arts, and that was like around the area of like 2013 to 2015, and that
Wow.
was back when Curtis was like already kind of like contemplating retirement, and that was years before his PFL and UFC days. That is why it is crazy for me watching Chris the Action Man Curtis, but he's become such like a kind of personality, at the upper level over the last few years that
100%.
but so, dude, that fight with Myron Dennis, how do you prepare for a professional kickboxer? Because over the last few years, we've seen all these guys making these transitions, and of varying levels of success, but really like the professional kickboxers are names you cannot ignore in these middleweight and light heavyweight divisions.
100%, dude. Especially because I think the reason you see a lot of them having success in 85, 205, and stuff like that is because up in these higher divisions, man, it's a lot of physicality and the overall like grappling skill level. If you just look at it overall, is a lot lower. Like if you look in those lower divisions, man, all of those guys, if you want to get to the top level, you got to have some really nice grappling. That's not as if you're a big dude that's very, very strong and powerful, it can really stop a lot of those takedowns. But man, for that Myron fight, like it was 3 weeks after the Bevan fight. So I fought those two guys 3 weeks apart. And I took that Myron fight on like I think it was 10 or 11 days notice. His opponent pulled out, and I saw the opportunity, and I was like, you know what, I'll fight this dude. Christmas was coming up, needed to get the fam some Christmas presents, so I said I'll get another check real quick. And my thought process going into that fight was, Myron's he's 35, older guy. You know what I mean? I felt like I had a physicality advantage. I knew I had a grappling advantage. So I figured I was like, man, I just know I can impose my will on this dude. And I might have got cracked a little bit on the feet there to start the thing off, but once I got a hold of him, I had a feeling that it wasn't going to last very long, and it really didn't.
Well, I mean, like you look at your sample of your last three wins: Niall
Mm-hmm.
Baldwin, Bevan Lewis, and Myron Dennis. Dude, I
Mm-hmm.
say this because you're on my show right now, and I want to pump you up. Like it's not because of that, but this is the reality of the sport. It could be tomorrow for you. It could be
Mm-hmm.
in 2 years from now. But one of these days, at this rate, the UFC is going to take notice.
They
And
have to.
not only that, MMA fans on a large, the people that pay attention to this sport at the micro levels have very much taken notice of you. Like you were a part of that big Tapology prospect draft like thing that those MMA. I'm in a chat with a like couple of those dudes, and like you were number 35 on that list, and
Dude, that was so cool.
it's got to be cool for you, and like it's part the weight classes that you're competing in, but
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, dude, this is a crazy set of weight classes on the worldwide ranking scale because this is where some of the dudes from ACA in these light heavyweight brackets that you don't necessarily know what their level of competition is. What the way some of those regional promotions are in that corner of the world. At the very least, dude, you could be anywhere from like 150th in the world at light heavyweight to 50th on any given night, depending on who you're fighting,
Mm-hmm.
how old they are. So it's a crazy time in your career. It's got to be where it's like and again, like not trying to throw any psychological monkey wrenches towards you. Like
No,
it's nothing like that, but it's like this is just the reality of your career. Is that like it could be tomorrow that you get the call from the UFC that they're looking for somebody at 205.
100%. And dude, the big thing for me was even through the holidays, I really made sure that I didn't gain much weight. Really wanted to stay in shape, be ready, because like that was a big, honestly, a part of the reason I took that Myron fight was I was like, it was a 10 or 11 days notice. I wanted to show that I was willing to do something like that, and that I'm willing to be real active. And I feel like that's something that the UFC is looking for. They're looking for active guys that are down to fight. And whenever, if they can call you 3, 4, 5 days and you'll take the fight, then they love that. So that's something I'm trying to show them that I'm down for. They can call me whenever, man, and I'll show up.
And at the same time, right? So this is someone where I've had enough guests in these exact spots. Like
Mm-hmm.
Harry Hunsucker, for instance, a dude from Kentucky who ended up
Yep.
like tied to Ivasa. Like so it's got to be something that and Nick Maximoff was our example before because he's a dude that fought at middleweight up to heavyweight and it
Mm-hmm.
fought that the UFC wanted. And now he's at Uriah Faber One Combat, which is first of all still a great organization.
Oh
That's
yeah.
about him. But especially at a young age, like crazy, like you're actually about like 2 years older, younger than me.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get offered these spots, there has to at least be some like part of you that's always thinking about like because there's an upside if they offer you a tie to Ivasa fight, right? Like if you get that win, like that's a huge thing. You're immediately there inside, and those are spots that, especially at heavyweight, which you're competing at in February, and we'll get that in a second. Those
Yeah.
are the spots that get offered.
Oh
So
yeah.
be some part of your thought process is like, dude, there's like got to be some line of like where I'm like, you know what, maybe not right now, but at the same time, you've always said you're ready for anything at any time.
Yeah, and I think it's important to try to be about it. One 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 thing is the only thing I think honestly the biggest thing holding me back is the number of pro fights I've had. There's they really I think me only having because after the Bevan fight I still only had 5 pro fights, and like the Myron fight got me to 6, but I don't have a ton of pro fights, so I think they're maybe hesitant because if you look at the UFC, so many of those guys have 30, 40 pro fights. But that's another part of the reason I fought Myron is he was I want to say he's got what like 32 or 30 something pro fights, and he's probably got 10 plus pro kickboxing fights. So the guy's probably close to 40 or 50 professional fights. So that was another thing I wanted to show that I was like, man, I'll fight those guys too. And at the end of the day, with the UFC, it's possible to get multiple opportunities, but you're probably not getting that many. So you got to be ready for them when they come, and you really got to try to make the most of them.
Now, to that point, okay, so Synergy FC, it is so an organization that you have in large part put on the map over the last year. And I'm sure that you could shout out a bunch of other prospects from there. And I know you have on social media and
For
whatnot,
sure.
but it's not necessarily one of the like top five that come to mind when I'm
No.
organization prospects. It's helped to put Missouri on the map. But
Mhm.
when you're thinking about your next steps in your career, the UFC is, the goal. Bellator has unfortunately, just as like a fan of the product that they have, it's fizzling out. It's going to be a part of PFL. As someone who was watching like Ben Askren fight in like outlet malls in 2013, like it's a shame to see that go.
Yeah.
But as a dude that's fighting middleweight, light heavyweight, heavyweight, there is Octagon, there is KSW and Ryzen and ECF across the
Hmm.
like and that's just across the world. There's in the United States other prospect feeder organizations, Cage Fury, LFA, everything in between. What kind of like offers have you I mean like what kind of outreach from that side have you seen since you started to pick up some of these bigger wins? And because it seems like you're pretty loyal to the area of Missouri, and so I have to think that that's at least a factor in you continuing to fight in Synergy and Peak and organizations like that.
Well, honestly, dude, the I love fighting for synergy. Fighting in my hometown's fun. You know what I mean? I've always got, like you said, I got a lot of people there, and it's a big crowd. The atmosphere that we get at these Synergy FC shows, like I seriously don't think a lot of people, like obviously, if you've never been to one, it's like the atmosphere in the Shrine Mosque, it gets pretty friggin' loud in there, and it's relatively packed. Like you don't get that a lot on the regional scene. A lot of the time in the regional scene, you're fighting in half empty arenas where there's a few hundred people, and they announce your name, and you hear like your three friends that came go, "Woo, go Julius!" So it's one of those things where it's not a great time. And another thing about the regional scene is the most guys are making the majority of their money from ticket sales and sponsorships. And that's 100%. I mean, that's close to the case with me. It's a similar amount that I'm making on, if not more, on ticket sales and sponsorships than I am from the purse itself. And when I fight in my hometown, I'm able to sell way more tickets, so I make a lot more money there. And then the sponsors have more interest because the fight's local. Like me fighting in, Texas or California or New York, all my sponsors are small local companies here in Springfield. So it's not really going to benefit them too much if I'm fighting, halfway across the country. So that's another factor. I've definitely been reached out to by really pretty much every regional promotion here in the United States, one point or another. The biggest thing for me too is at some point, like, yes, I'm willing to fight whoever, but the risk and the reward has to match up for me. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna, just to be completely honest, I'm not gonna go fight an absolute killer for 1K, 1K when I can fight, a similar level of opponent on Synergy for double that. Plus, I'll sell 20% of my tickets, and I'll sell $10,000, $12,000 worth of tickets and make another 2, 3 grand. Like, so it's like I'm maxing out 2K over there when on Synergy I'm making over five. So it's like I'm really not. I really don't. It's on some level I do have to think of it like that, risking the body and all that. But no, they've definitely all reached out. I've heard from all of them. The biggest thing for me is matching up that risk and reward.
And so, how has the business of like managing your sponsors kind of changed over these last few wins? When it's like now some of these people realize that they could be on the verge of reaching larger markets.
Um, One thing that's been good for me, man, is a lot of my sponsors, and really shout out to all of them. A lot of my sponsors have sponsored me since like my first or second pro fight. Like almost all of my sponsors have been sponsoring me since like, pretty much I started fighting pro. So, they've been super, super helpful. It's one of those things where these are guys that I can reach out to them and they're pretty willing to provide pretty much whatever I need, and it's a huge blessing. But I've definitely started to get a little bit more interest in that front as I've picked up more wins, and I think people in the local community where I'm at have started to take notice, and I think that it's one of those things that's only going to build, it's only going to grow. Eventually, at some point, I'm going to have to probably turn it over to the management team, hopefully, and then if we're talking some of those real nice sponsorship deals, I'm trying to be in like a freaking underwear commercial or something like that. I'm trying to be on a fucking box of cereal or a fucking ice cream cone or something.
And I mean, that takes because I see you on social media all the time. That's half that's most of the way that we've interacted up to this point. And
For
like,
sure.
you're active with it, and that's what you're supposed to be doing. This is a sport where it helps to be really good. It also helps for people to like you,
Mhm.
like the Hunger Games, I suppose. But dude, you've got this fight coming up February 22nd at
Yeah.
heavy, and this is important, especially off of our last conversation. And
Hmm.
this dude, 3-4 as a pro, Mark Courier, 27 years old. But first of all, it really especially for heavyweight, better than his record suggests. He is 6'5". He has fought at super heavyweight before, at weighing into like 300 pounds. Uh,
Hmm.
he has had fights against Bailey Schoenfelder, who at one point was a big favorite on the Contender Series, but got upset this past fall. He's had, and that fight was in Bellator. He has had like a lot of good fights in North Iowa
Yep.
fights, and so this at least has to be a fight to show because this is not a gimme by any stretch, dude. He's a big dude. He's a big dude, and fighting at heavyweight, you're an athletic lighter heavyweight who's just got like great feet and great athleticism for that weight class. But this is a real heavyweight, and he's a guy that's fought real heavyweight. So, what's your thinking going into this fight, and like why in this interim, when you have your options, why take this fight at heavyweight at Peak FC to try to win that heavyweight title?
Man, so the biggest thing for me taking this fight, staying active. That's a big thing for me. I want to stay. I try to stay almost in camp at all times. Obviously I take my weeks here and there to relax a little bit and let my body heal up, but I really want to stay active. That's a big part of the reason I took that fight. He was an opponent. Like it's getting to the point where it's tough to find opponents. It's not super easy to plug people, off the street. And then again, like I don't like I hate I've said this before on I've definitely said this before on podcasts. I hate when people say that nobody will fight them because it's just not true. There's always people out there that will fight you, but it just has to make sense. And it's one of those things with this Courier fight where he's a big tough guy. You know what I mean? He's going to be game. He's going to come to fight. And I think it'll be a fight where, the local people can enjoy it. Two guys that combine for probably close to 500 pounds, both over 6'4", getting in there and slinging some leather. I think it'll be an entertaining fight. I think I'm much faster. I'm a much better grappler. I'm a little bit more technical everywhere than he is. Um, and I don't think he's going to have a tremendous strength advantage. I'm on the big side of light heavyweight and the small side of heavyweight, and I don't think that there's going to be if there even is a strength difference, I think it'll be gone within 2 to 3 minutes because he'll start to fatigue. And I really think that if he can last past the first few minutes, if he can last through a takedown, he's going to drown. And I'm pretty confident in that, man. Obviously anything can happen in there, but I do think that I am on a different level here.
And Julius, this is kind of the last question I have for you because I was going through the UFC or no, the world light heavyweight and middleweight and heavyweight rankings. Hell, we saw Ihor Potieria, take another loss last night. And the reason
Mhm.
I is because if that dude, wasn't on the verge of being cut from the UFC, or anybody like, the likes of Cody Brundage, the likes of Abdul Razak Al Hassan, these are guys that you actually have to think about fighting soon. Like that's
Mhm.
much in the realm of possibility. So and heavyweight, for who your next opponent is, that is not that far away and less far away than people realize than being an entry level UFC fight. You know,
Yeah.
who's somebody that as you're at this point in your career in the UFC, whether it be at 185, 205, or 265, that you think of and you think that would be a fun fight that I think I'm a good matchup in?
So I'd say I'm pretty confident that I'll be at 205 in UFC. 185 at this point, probably have to cut off a leg, cut off another appendage. Who knows? Because I don't know if this old boy can squeeze down to 85. When I made 85, I didn't have a wife. I got a wife now, man. She cooks for me. She keeps me fed, man. A happy man's got a full belly, so she knows that. So I don't know about 185 anymore. 205, I look at that 205 division, and I've definitely thought about this. I'll be real with you. Tuco Tokos, I think that's a fight that I like. We have common opponents. We have common opponent in Myron. I think that's a good fight. I also think what's the other guy's name? Ozzy Diaz. That's another guy that was. If you look at both of those guys, they fought